Lower Manhattan, 2006. The air conditioning hums in the glass-walled conference room overlooking the Hudson River. On the mahogany table sits a digital file representing 10,000 home loans. Most of these mortgages belong to people with no verified income, no steady jobs, and no assets. Mathematically, this portfolio is radioactive waste, a ticking time bomb of guaranteed defaults. But an analyst in a tailored suit looks over a spreadsheet, picks up a metaphorical rubber stamp, and presses it onto the cover page. The stamp reads, AAA. In a single keystroke, financial garbage is transformed into solid gold, deemed by the market to be as safe as a United States Treasury bond. This is not a glitch. This is the foundational paradox of the global economy. 3 private, for-profit companies hold the absolute power to dictate reality to the financial system. They do not lend money. They do not borrow money. They simply sell their opinions. And yet, their opinions control exactly who gets funded, who goes bankrupt, and how tens of trillions of dollars move across the planet. To understand how this alchemy happens, you have to sit inside the negotiation. Imagine an investment banker from Lehman Brothers sliding a term sheet across a desk to an analyst from Standard & Poor's. The banker says, "I have a $1 billion collateralized debt obligation. I need you to grade it, but I can only sell it to my pension fund clients if the top layer gets a AAA rating. Can you give me the AAA?" The rating analyst looks at the paperwork. He knows his firm only makes money if they secure the contract to rate this specific deal. The analyst replies, "We can give you the AAA, but our fee for analysing this complex structure will be $1.5 million. The banker smiles and signs the contract. This conversation is the dark heart of the credit market. The rating agencies are supposed to be the objective judges of financial safety, but they are negotiating their paychecks directly with the very people whose homework they are supposed to be grading. This mechanism is known as the issuer pays model. Imagine a university where the students pay the professors a massive cash bonus, but only if the professor guarantees them an A+ on their final exam. If the professor decides to give a C-, the student simply walks across the hall and pays a different professor instead. It is structurally absurd. Prior to the 1970s, the system operated on an investor pays model. People who wanted to buy bonds bought subscription manuals to see the ratings. But the industry shifted. Today, the corporation or bank issuing the debt pays the rating agency directly. The agencies serve 2 masters: the clients who pay their massive fees and demand the highest possible grades, and the investors who rely on those grades to not lose their life savings. It is a classic principal-agent problem. If you want to understand the hidden machinery of capital and join the few who actually see how the system is rigged, hit subscribe to Capital Curriculum, because the students in this rigged university are playing with your retirement money. What makes this issuer pays conflict so dangerous is the sheer lack of competition. If there were 50 rating agencies, a reputation for lying would quickly bankrupt the liars. But there are not 50. There are 3. Standard & Poor's controls roughly 50% of the global market. Moody's Investor Service holds about 32%. Fitch Ratings takes another 12%. Together, this big 3 oligopoly commands over 95% of the entire global ratings business. They grade corporate bonds, municipal debt, and complex derivatives. Even more shockingly, they control 99% of sovereign credit ratings, meaning they judge the safety of entire countries. They operate as a legally entrenched cartel. Over the past century, they have systematically bought out smaller local competitors from India to Chile. absorbing any threat to their dominance. They sit at the absolute center of the world's debt plumbing. But this cartel did not seize power through force or brilliant innovation. They were handed the keys to the kingdom by the very regulators who were supposed to keep them in check. Basel, Switzerland, 2004. Inside a sterile, fluorescent-lit conference room at the Bank for International Settlements, global financial regulators are drafting the rules that will govern the world's banks. They face a massive logistical headache. They need to figure out how much emergency cash a bank must hold in reserve in case its investments go bad. But thousands of new financial products are being created every week. The regulators do not have the manpower, the budgets, or the mathematical genius to analyse every single bond in existence. So, they make a fateful decision. They decide to outsource their regulatory duties to the private sector. They write the rules so that the capital requirements for banks are directly tied to the letter grades issued by recognised credit rating agencies. In a stroke of a pen, a private opinion published by S&P or Moody's is transformed into international banking law. The regulators effectively install the rating agencies as the undisputed bouncers of the global financial club, hardwiring their grades into the very foundation of the modern banking system. Listen to how this delegation of power plays out in a corporate boardroom. A pension fund manager is speaking to his lead trader. The manager says, "We have $2 billion in new retirement contributions to deploy this month. Where are we putting it?" The trader replies, "I found a high-yield corporate bond that looks fundamentally solid, but it is rated BB by Moody's." The manager immediately shakes his head. "You know our charter. By law, we are only allowed to buy investment-grade securities. It has to be rated BBB- or higher. I do not care what your internal analysis says. If the agency does not bless it, we cannot touch it." This conversation repeats across thousands of institutions globally. Mutual funds, insurance companies, and state pensions are legally blind to actual risk. They are only allowed to see the letters. The government mandates created an artificial, captive demand for the Big Three's services. The agencies no longer had to compete on the accuracy of their predictions because their grades were legally required for participation in the market. The mechanism driving this power is called risk weighting. Imagine a pie chart representing a bank's total assets. Regulators demand that a slice of that pie be kept in pure cash as a safety net. If a bank holds a bond rated AAA, the rules dictate a risk weight of perhaps 20%. That means the bank only has to keep a tiny sliver of cash in reserve. But if that exact same bond drops to a BBB rating, the risk weight jumps to 50 or 100%. The bank is suddenly forced to hoard massive amounts of dead cash, killing its profitability. Because of this mechanical rule, the letter grade dictates the cost of doing business. The agencies were no longer just observers, they became the ultimate gatekeepers of capital efficiency. A favourable rating allowed a bank to leverage itself to the moon, borrowing cheaply and lending aggressively. An unfavourable rating meant strict limits and expensive capital. The Big Three essentially held the power to tax the banking system, and they collected their toll at the door of every single transaction. By the early 2000s, this regulatory entrenchment had created an invincible business model. The Big Three enjoyed profit margins that rivaled the most lucrative software monopolies on Earth. They had first-mover advantage, centuries of brand recognition, and the ultimate competitive moat: government mandates. Their opinions were law. But absolute power, combined with an issuer pays model, creates a very specific kind of vulnerability. Wall Street's largest investment banks quickly realized that if the rating agencies controlled the supply of AAA ratings, and the banks controlled the fee revenue paying those agencies, they could engineer a mutually beneficial explosion of wealth. The banks just needed to invent a product that produced massive fees, required a AAA rating to sell, and was so mathematically complex that the regulators would never understand it. They found their golden goose in the American housing market. The stage was perfectly set for the greatest financial illusion in modern history, one that would turn the American dream of home ownership into a weapon of mass financial destruction. A Wall Street Quant Bullpen, 2005. The air is thick with the glow of dual monitors displaying complex stochastic calculus. Young mathematicians, lured away from aerospace engineering, are building the financial equivalent of a particle accelerator. It is called a collateralized debt obligation, or CDO. The raw material pouring into this factory is subprime mortgages. These are loans given to borrowers with terrible credit histories, zero down payments, and adjustable interest rates that are destined to explode. By themselves, these individual loans are junk. No pension fund would ever buy them. But the quants are not trying to sell individual loans. They are going to pool thousands of these toxic mortgages together and slice them into layers. The entire operation hinges on one crucial step: getting the rating agencies to declare the top layer of this toxic pool as safe as government debt. And the rating agencies are more than happy to help. In fact, they have sent the investment banks their proprietary software manuals, showing them exactly how to beat the test. The structuring process looks less like financial analysis and more like a video game cheat code. The Wall Street structurer calls the rating agency analyst. The structurer asks, if I put 80% subprime mortgages and 20% auto loans into this pool, does your model spit out a AAA for the senior tranche? The agency analyst runs the simulation on his computer. No, you are coming up short. The model says you need a slightly thicker cushion of equity at the bottom to absorb early defaults. The structurer taps his keyboard. Okay, what if I swap out the auto loans for a mezzanine slice of another CDO, and I pay for a credit default swap on the bottom 5%? The analyst runs the numbers again. Yes, the model clears. You have your AAA. This is the ultimate betrayal of the gatekeeper role. The agencies were not independently evaluating finished products. They were acting as architects, actively coaching the banks on how to construct securities with the absolute minimum possible collateral needed to trigger the AAA stamp. To visualize this financial trick, imagine a towering pyramid of champagne glasses. The champagne being poured at the top represents the monthly mortgage payments coming from thousands of homeowners. The glasses at the very top of the pyramid are the AAA tranches. They get filled first. The glasses at the bottom are the unrated equity tranches. They only get whatever champagne trickles down. The rating agencies built complex statistical models based on an assumption called correlation. They assumed that a housing crash in Miami would have zero correlation with a housing crash in Phoenix. They told investors that even if a few people defaulted at the bottom, the sheer diversity of the pool meant the champagne would never stop reaching the top glasses. It was a beautiful mathematical theory that completely ignored reality. It ignored that the loans were fundamentally fraudulent, and it ignored that a nationwide housing bubble would cause every glass in the pyramid to shatter simultaneously. But the agencies kept rubber stamping the deals, because every new champagne tower meant another massive fee for their quarterly earnings report. The scale of this operation defies comprehension. In the run-up to the 2007 crisis, the big three rating agencies stamped their highest AAA rating on securities backed by over $3 trillion of subprime and Alt-A mortgages. Let that number sink in. $3 trillion of junk, legally disguised as the safest investments on the planet, injected directly into the veins of global pension funds, insurance companies, and municipal treasuries. The investment banks were paying handsome fees for these ratings, and the agencies had every financial incentive to keep the music playing. Their stock prices soared. Their executives took home massive bonuses. They had successfully weaponized their regulatory monopoly to mass produce artificial trust. The financial system was now fully loaded with highly combustible, toxic waste, all beautifully wrapped in AAA paper. Everything looked perfect on the surface, but out in the real world, beyond the spreadsheets and the corporate boardrooms, the American housing market was beginning to crack, and the agencies were about to face a mathematical reality they could no longer model away. Miami, late 2006. The scorching sun beats down on a sprawling subdivision where half the homes are empty. Plywood covers the windows, and neon foreclosure signs are multiplying like a virus across the manicured lawns. Homeowners who bought 5-bedroom houses with no money down are simply walking away and mailing their keys back to the banks. The champagne is no longer flowing. The monthly payments that feed the massive CDO pyramids on Wall Street are drying up at an alarming rate. Yet, inside the Bloomberg terminals of global trading desks, something impossible is happening. The real-world housing market is clearly in freefall, but the ratings on the complex mortgage bonds remain perfectly stable. The AAA letters refuse to blink. The prices of these bonds hold steady because the rating agencies refuse to issue downgrades. A massive disconnect opens up between the burning reality of the subdivisions and the pristine digital ledgers of the financial system. The gatekeepers are watching the smoke rise, but they are terrified to pull the fire alarm. Behind closed doors, the analysts at the rating agencies knew exactly what was happening. We know this because their internal instant messages were later subpoenaed by Congress. Imagine reading the transcripts of 2 senior analysts at S&P chatting on their company computers. One analyst types, "This market is a house of cards. The new data shows these subprime pools are going to default massively." The second analyst replies, "Let us hope we are all wealthy and retired by the time this house of cards falters." In another infamous exchange, an analyst voices concern about the sheer absurdity of the mortgage structures they are approving. His colleague types back, "It could be structured by cows, and we would rate it." They knew the models were broken. They knew the collateral was garbage. Yet, when lower-level risk officers raised red flags and suggested they halt the AAA machine, management routinely suppressed the warnings. The machine could not be stopped. The revenue stream was simply too addictive, and the threat of competition was too strong. The mechanism that kept the ratings artificially high was the constant, paralyzing fear of losing market share. In the issuer pays model, an agency that suddenly gets strict will simply starve to death. Imagine a scenario where Moody's looks at the rising defaults and tells an investment bank, "We are changing our methodology. We can no longer give this subprime CDO a AAA rating. It deserves a BBB." The investment banker does not argue. He simply smiles, packs up his briefcase, and walks across the street to Fitch or S&P, offering them the $1 million fee instead. This creates a race to the bottom. The agencies are held hostage by the issuers. If they upgrade their standards to reflect reality, they lose the client. So they delayed. They tweaked assumptions, ignored the rising tide of defaults, and prayed for a miraculous turnaround in the housing market. They kept millions of investors in the dark, maintaining the illusion of safety while the underlying assets rotted away. They chose to protect their quarterly profits rather than protect the financial system. By the summer of 2007, the delay tactics could no longer hold back the mathematical tide. The actual losses inside the mortgage pools were so catastrophic that even the most manipulated models could not justify a AAA rating. The dam finally broke. In a sudden, panicked wave, the rating agencies began issuing mass downgrades. Bonds that had been stamped with the highest seal of approval just months earlier were suddenly slashed to junk status overnight. It was an admission of total failure. But the timing of these downgrades was disastrous. By waiting until the very last second to acknowledge the truth, the agencies ensured that the market would not experience a slow, manageable deflation. Instead, they triggered a violent, instantaneous shockwave. The sudden downgrades were not just a change in opinion, they were a systemic trigger that activated the mechanical risk-weight rules across the globe. The music had abruptly stopped, and the forced liquidations that followed would rip the heart out of the global economy, destroying institutions that had stood for a century. September 2008. The trading floor of Lehman Brothers is paralysed. Red numbers cascade across thousands of Bloomberg terminals like digital blood. The mass downgrades by S&P and Moody's have acted like a tripwire, detonating the regulatory traps set years earlier. Across the globe, pension funds and insurance companies receive automated alerts. The mortgage bonds they hold are no longer AAA. They are junk. And because of the hardwired regulatory rules, these funds are legally prohibited from holding junk. They must sell immediately. The market is flooded with billions of dollars of toxic assets, but there are no buyers. Prices gap down to zero. Panic sets in. Banks realise that the collateral backing their own loans is worthless, so they stop lending to each other. The vital plumbing of the global financial system freezes solid. Employees carry their belongings out of skyscrapers in cardboard boxes as trillion-dollar empires collapse. The alchemy has reversed. The gold has violently reverted back into radioactive waste, and it is burning through the balance sheets of the entire world. In the chaotic aftermath, furious investors and regulators drag the executives of the rating agencies into austere government hearing rooms. The dialogue is dripping with outrage. A congressman leans into his microphone and shouts, "You told the world these securities were as safe as US treasuries. Pension funds bought them based on your seal of approval. How do you justify this massive failure?" The rating agency executive, flanked by high-priced corporate lawyers, adjusts his glasses and delivers a masterclass in legal evasion. He replies, "Senator, our ratings are simply forward-looking statements of opinion. They are protected by the First Amendment, just like a movie review in a newspaper. We never guaranteed that the bonds would not default. Investors should have done their own due diligence." It is an astonishing defence. The agencies, whose grades were legally embedded into global capital requirements, whose stamps dictated the flow of trillions of dollars, suddenly claim they are nothing more than financial journalists offering a harmless perspective. They take the profits of a gatekeeper, but refuse the liability. The mechanism of the crash was a devastating feedback loop, driven directly by the delayed downgrades. Imagine a ship where the watertight doors are wired to an alarm system controlled by a third party. The ship is taking on massive amounts of water, but the third party refuses to sound the alarm because the shipping company pays their salary. When the water finally reaches the bridge, the alarm sounds, but it is far too late. The mass downgrades forced banks to write down the value of their assets. By 2010, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of these supposedly risk-free AAA securities were downgraded to junk status. Total write-downs across the financial sector exceeded $500 billion. This massive destruction of capital forced banks to cut off credit to small businesses and consumers, triggering a brutal global recession. The artificial trust created by the issuer pays model had evaporated, leaving behind a crater of foreclosures and unemployment. The mechanical reliance on credit ratings had proven to be the fatal flaw in the architecture of modern capitalism. Following the wreckage, the United States government launched the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission to find the root cause of the collapse. After reviewing millions of documents and conducting hundreds of interviews, their final report delivered a damning, unequivocal conclusion. They wrote, The mortgage-related securities at the heart of the crisis could not have been marketed and sold without their seal of approval. This crisis could not have happened without the rating agencies. It was the ultimate indictment. The Big Three were officially recognised as the indispensable enablers of the greatest financial disaster since the Great Depression. The public demanded justice. They demanded that the cartel be broken, that the issuer pays conflict of interest be outlawed, and that the agencies be stripped of their regulatory power. New legislation was drafted. The Dodd-Frank Act promised sweeping reforms. It seemed impossible that these three companies could survive the exposure of their catastrophic failures. Yet, as the dust settled and the political theatre concluded, a chilling reality began to emerge from the ashes of 2008. Capitol Hill gives way to the sleek boardrooms of today. The political yelling has faded. Despite being identified as the primary architects of the crisis, the rating agencies did not die. No executives went to prison for stamping toxic waste with AAA. The agencies paid a few $1 billion in corporate settlements, a mere cost of doing business, and returned to their desks. Post-crisis reforms like Dodd-Frank forced them to publish thicker methodology manuals and create new compliance departments. Regulators attempted to remove the mechanistic reliance on ratings from certain laws. But the fundamental core of the machine was left completely untouched. S&P, Moody's, and Fitch still control 96% of the global market. They are still legally entrenched as recognized statistical rating organizations. And most importantly, they are still paid by the exact same issuers whose debt they are evaluating. The paperwork is thicker, the models have new variables, but the original sin remains. The person who needs the grade is still writing the check to the teacher. The cartel survived the apocalypse. Today, their power extends far beyond mortgage derivatives. Listen to a hypothetical phone call between a finance minister of a European nation and a sovereign debt analyst at Fitch. The minister pleads, "Our economy is recovering. If you downgrade our national debt to BBB-, our borrowing costs will spike by billions. We will be forced to cut healthcare and pensions to balance the budget." The analyst responds coldly, "Our macro models suggest your debt to GDP ratio is unsustainable. The downgrade is scheduled for Friday." This is not a negotiation over a corporate bond. This is an unelected, private, for-profit company dictating the fiscal policy of a sovereign democracy. With a 99% market share in sovereign ratings, a single negative outlook from the Big Three can trigger capital flight, collapse a currency, and force millions of citizens into brutal austerity. Governments live in constant fear of the rating cartel, tailoring their political agendas to please analysts in New York and London. They are the true gatekeepers of the global fiat system. The danger today hides in the corporate bond market. Imagine a treacherous cliff edge. Above the cliff is the safe zone, investment-grade debt. Below the cliff is a jagged canyon of junk bonds. Right now, trillions of dollars of corporate debt sit exactly 1 inch from the edge, rated BBB-, the lowest possible investment-grade rating. Companies have borrowed unprecedented amounts of money to fund stock buybacks. Critics and empirical studies warn that the rating agencies are once again terrified to downgrade these mega corporations. Why? Because of the issuer pays conflict. If an agency pushes a massive corporation off the cliff into junk status, they anger their biggest paying clients and risk triggering a wave of fallen angels that could crash the corporate bond market. So, just like in 2007, the ratings stay artificially high. The agencies act as architects for new structured products like collateralized loan obligations, helping issuers design deals that just barely clear the rating thresholds with the minimum possible collateral. The exact same vulnerability that destroyed the housing market has been quietly rebuilt in corporate credit. The system hasn't changed. The specific CDO structures of 2008 may be gone, but the structural absurdity remains intact. 3 private companies, shielded from liability by the excuse of free speech, are still paid by issuers to produce grades that drive regulatory capital and blind investor demand. They still possess the power to trigger forced selling algorithms that can crash markets overnight. They are the absolute authority in a financial system running on record levels of global debt. When the next major shock hits the credit markets, whether it comes from corporate defaults or sovereign debt crises, the same gatekeepers will be at the switch, and their incentives will still be fundamentally compromised. The ticking time bomb was never diffused. It was just hidden behind a thicker stack of compliance paperwork. The gatekeepers are still holding the keys, and they are still being paid by the people trying to pick the lock. If you found this investigation revealing and want to see the mechanisms they do not teach you in school, subscribe to Capital Curriculum.